Well, look here. It was such a big day here in Africa today with the coming into effect of the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement, bringing together, which is expected to bring together at the end of the day about 54 countries of Africa with a combined population of about 1.33 billion people and a combined GDP of about 100 trillion shillings. Yeah, you got me right. 100 trillion shillings. The question is Africa ready for a borderless trade regime? That is the question that everybody is asking. And I don't have answer to that question at this point, but I am joined by two gentlemen who told me they have an answer to that question, plus many other more questions. And I'm joined by Edgar Ondari. He's the Executive Director at Eco News Africa. Thank you very much, Edgar, for joining us here.
You're welcome.
You told me you have answers to this question, right?
Well, I have some of the answers.
You have some of the answers,
yes,
eh?
yes.
You better have the answers, because if that's not the case, I'm going to throw you out.
Okay.
Very good. And next to Edgar, we have Kisa Africa. He is the Program Officer of Trade at Siatini, Uganda. Thank you. Very good. My brother from across the border.
Thank you for having me.
It's very good. Now, tell me this, and I would want to start with you from where you stand.
Yes.
Kisa, is Africa ready for a free trade area?
That's an amazing question. We should look at the priorities of the countries. The first thing is that before looking at Africa as a whole, it would be best we look at the East African community itself, how we've been faring. Currently, we are the East African community is boxed in what I would call trade disagreements, trade wars, if you might go extreme. Countries are at each other's necks, and
there's a lot of friction.
Yes, there's a lot of friction, to use that word. Thank you. And you find that our trade with ourselves, amongst ourselves as the region, is still so low. The MSMEs, who are the Juakaris, their entrance, their utilization of the opportunities that are there in the EAC market have really been dwindled. They are not there. So the question is, we have failed to address the non-tariff barriers, which would increase our opportunities in the EAC market. We have failed, yet we are yet to really maximize the opportunities they are in. Now there comes the bigger elephant, the CFTA at the continental level. Now the challenges we're expecting. The challenge has been that there has been less consultations and less involvement of even the beneficiaries of the private sector. You go on the street and ask the one inch, the Juakaris, the MSMEs. They don't know what it takes. Concept. I mean, it has been really that we have really been following a rapid and timeline-based negotiations rather than a content and issue-based negotiation. Now that's why you have the challenge. So we have had just a hybrid agreement, but now the real work starts. How would we give our offers? How would we liberalize? What issue should, for example, Kenya give to liberalize? So that if you are liberalizing, let's say, with Ethiopia, you don't liberalize, let's say, the dairy sector and end up killing the domestic dairy sector. So that's the question.
I'll be coming back to you because we want to get more insight into that. But let's come to Edgar. Do you share in his sentiment that there has been a lot of talk, but when you look at the work, it's absolutely non-existent?
I think I do. The problem that we have with the way the CFTA has been negotiated is that people have been using timelines to talk about how the negotiations are going to be structured. And the problem with that is you end up not canvassing the issues that are supposed to be canvassed. So, for example, we are talking about the agreement coming into force, and you only have 24 countries out of the total number of countries in Africa. 54 who have been able to agree to it. Then secondly, you have a number of issues like what my colleague here was talking about in terms of the lists. When you're negotiating trade agreements, one of the first things that is supposed to be done is countries are supposed to give their lists of offers and requests. Now that list is not complete. So when someone actually wakes up and says that we are going to have the agreement coming into force, I'm actually surprised, because I would say we still have a lot of work to be done before we start talking about the agreement coming into force.
Is this a case of putting the cart before the horse.
Yes.
Would you say so?
Yes. Actually, what is happening is you have, I think there's been this rush. If you look at the way the global trade regime has been going on, there's been a general failure of the World Trade Organization. So countries have been going into what we are now calling mega-regional agreements. So you have the EU negotiating with the US, you have the Asia-Pacific area negotiating with the US and Japan. So people are running into these mega-regional agreements. So Africa, not wanting to be left behind, said, oh, okay, let's sit and have our own agreement. And quickly you come together and say, let's, the 55 of us.
Are you trying to dismiss, you know, the thought leaders, you know, who came up with the idea that they were just following the trail?
A very noble idea that has been rushed.
Yes. Do you agree with him?
Yes, I do concur, because the CFTA is born through the Abuja Declaration,
yes,
where they wanted to have, you know, the one Africa, African unity. Now, one of the aspirations of achieving the Abuja Treaty under the Lagos Plan of Action was to have, first of all, make the already existing regional economic blocks work. And these economic blocks at the regional level were supposed to be the building blocks of a bigger African free trade area. Now, the issue is that we are yet to make the regional economic blocks at the EAC level, ECOWAS, they are not yet working. Now, so you are finding that you are taking on now a bigger level of ambition, you know. So that's the challenge, is that we have failed to follow what we had set out to do at the beginning. And that makes it really a challenge that you are rushing. Yes, and that becomes...
You know, the global model of borderless trade region and integration is basically the European Union. The reason why Britain felt the need to leave the EU, they felt there was loss of national identity. Exactly. Are we likely to face the same here in Africa?
Well, what is going to happen is we've already talked about the free movement of persons that is allowed under the CFTA. So you'll have these transactions between various citizens of the continent.
Yeah.
But then what we have not been able to do is to allow the smaller persons to be able to benefit from this agreement. Exactly. So what you're likely to see is, yes, you have this borderless movement, but then it's borderless movement of people who are not doing business, because you've not enabled the...
Jaywalkers.
Yes. Well.
All right, keep going.
Yes, so you've opened up borders, yes, and you're saying people are open to business, but then you've not put down the enabling agreements to be able to allow businesses to thrive. For example, we've not been able to address how SMEs are going to be affected by this agreement. Yes. So the first issue about SMEs is financing. So you're going to have a situation where multinationals are going to come and establish businesses and start out competing SMEs in those small spaces that they're supposed to compete. But because they have the financial muscle to extend beyond national borders, they'll extend and be able to benefit from those markets at the expense of our local players.
Exactly.
Yes.
Tell me this, Kisa.
Yes.
You're from Uganda.
Yes.
And when you look at trade between intra-EAC trade, it has been declining, by the way, unfortunately, for reasons that are widely known. There has been a lot of disagreement at the political level between leaders of the region.
Yes.
Now we are getting into a bigger regime. If we can't deal with small disagreements, can we deal with bigger disagreements?
Yeah, that is the question that really we've been trying to interrogate. Yes, under the dispute settlement mechanism, the CFTA is looking at more, I would use the word maybe harsher, punitive measures. These are concrete punitive measures to ensure that countries which, for example, introduce non-tariff barriers and all that, so it is going to be more punitive than at the EAC level. But the challenge has been that, you see, when you fail to start small, the chances of you really succeeding at the bigger level really becomes small. It becomes very, because if you look at, for example, the quality of our products.
But it's not a matter that you have to start small, right?
There's always a beginning point, but when the beginning point is really questionable, where there's already a gap.
You're shaky.
You're shaky. So you were talking, in the bulletins, we were talking about standards of the products that are going to be used to access the EAC market. At the Ugandan level, for example, our MSMEs cannot access, for example, the EAC market because you have put a tariff on packaging materials which are supposed to help them meet the quality. So you have not yet made your internal markets work. The challenge is that you have to first organize production, make your economics at the national level work, at the regional level work, and then you climb up the top. Otherwise, then you are in for the big four, big brothers, Egypt, South Africa, Nigeria, and Kenya in that case. They will take over the market, yes. They will take over the market, you become a kitchen, you become the receiver. You end up having a lot of trade deficit within intra-African trade. So that's the challenge.
Tell me, These, it's still well at 8. I mean, let's study the EAC model here.
Yes.
You have a problem. You have an integrated community in the name of EAC, exactly, which is viewed as an integration model here in Africa. But in this model, you have a situation whereby Kenya and Tanzania, they have trade challenges.
Yes.
On the other hand, you have Uganda and Rwanda,
yes,
having issues.
Yes.
You have Burundi and Rwanda having also challenges.
Yes.
You have South Sudan having its own internal wrangles.
Yes.
If we haven't cleaned this mess, are we taking it to a higher level?
Yes, and that could be a recipe for disaster. Sorry to use that, but that's the reality. And to me, to us, our message has always been, and that's the challenge that Edgar was saying, we have rushed. If you look at the level of ambition that our leaders are taking, it is really sure that we are not clear on where we want to see Africa going. Now, that's the challenge. If you look at African, indeed at the East African community challenges, last year in 2018, the EAC Secretariat came up with a proposal to start punishing countries that introduced non-tariff barriers. 1 month after it had said that, 7 more non-tariff barriers were reintroduced. So you can, I mean, those that are already, so reintroducing the already resolved non-tariff barriers. There are also other new ones. There are those that have been existing for so long. So we are yet to really consolidate EAC. We are still at 14%, 12%, something like that. We are yet to achieve the 32% that is envisaged at the Common Market Protocol. Yeah. So we have to first of all be competitive at the regional level, at the national level. Then we can be able to compete at the bigger level. That's the only way.
So your assumptions are these, that the foundation of the ASFTA are shaky.
Yes.
Very good. I'll be coming back to you, but I want to hear from Edgar. Look here, there is a feeling like this whole project is being championed by African leaders without Africans behind them.
Certainly.
Could this be farther from the truth?
It's not farther from the truth. Actually, if you look at what has happened, let me give you the easiest example. One of the first things to be cleared was, you remember the free movement of persons. And who were the first people who got the African passport? It was the political leadership.
African leaders.
So, you know, you've not even consulted at the very basic level, but you're introducing some of these regulations and expecting everyone else to carry you around. And the problem with that is that you're going to have a situation where, yes, we have agreed on very fine documents, we have developed some of the best protocols that can be able to be considered for the CFTA. But then implementation becomes a cropper, because you have a situation where people have not understood the basic tenets of what you're trying to build. And you have not been able to build it from the bottom up. So because of that then, you're not seeing people are not understanding and seeing the benefits of what is going to come with a wider integration. And the problem with that is, for those persons who have been able to see what it entails, especially multinationals, they're quick to come and say, okay, let me come, buy a local company and start trading and also go across the markets. Yes.
We always talk about unity in numbers. Yes. So what is missing here?
What is missing? You see, there's unity in numbers, but first of all, there has to be a basic understanding of what the objective is. So we do not have a basic common understanding, and that's why you're seeing 24 countries out of 55 being able to benefit, signed down to the agreement. So people have not agreed on the basic tenets of the CFTA. But we are rushing to say, okay, let's bring in all the numbers and have a multi-agreement. A multi-agreement for what? That is the question people are asking. You get, you might have an agreement, you might have all the protocols that you want to implement, but if you do not have a basic understanding of the final ultimate objective of what you want to achieve, that is going to be problematic.
Kisa, tell me this. I mean, it was very interesting when African leaders, were agreeing on the CFTA.
Yes.
There was a reemergence of xenophobic attacks in Durban, that is KwaZulu-Natal in South Africa. The targets were Nigerians and Somalis. What does this tell us about African integration?
Yes, it tells us the fact that actually integration is more of less of borders, physical borders, and more of mental borders. We are still very foreign to each other at the African level. Actually, if you see the relationship, the way Africa relates with, let's say, Europe, it is very different from the way Africa relates with Pharaoh Africa. That's the challenge. That even at the East African level, movement of persons, we have liberalized. Movement of capital is okay, movement of goods is okay, but the movement of persons is challenging. At COMESA, Ethiopia, which is the headquarters of the African Union, has remained one of the countries that have maintained visas. And yet, under COMESA arrangement, you're supposed to have free movement of persons, a visa-free regime. But Ethiopia has remained stuck onto that. So you can say that there is...
And actually, it is yet to sign the agreement.
Absolutely. And it has everything to gain from the agreement, given being the headquarters. But that's what shows that we are still having the Brexit kind of, the inward looking that is still within. So we have, first of all, clear the mental borders. And how do you do that? Bring people together, consult, have wider consultations to have a common understanding, to have common consensus, and have people buy into the aspirations. And then, like Edgar was saying, after having a common understanding and building the ground, then you can now start engaging in the negotiations.
Kisa is bringing a very interesting perspective here about Ethiopia. I mean, it is the headquarters of African Union, and it's supposed to lead by example. And they are yet to ratify the CFTA agreement. Number two, they are yet to open up the economy. The economy is a highly closed economy. So are they preaching water and behind the back indulging in wine?
Ethiopia is being careful. The other country you've not mentioned is Nigeria.
Which is Africa's biggest economy, by the way.
Because, you know, like I said, this agreement has been rushed through. And people have not given much thought into, like I've told you, people have not even given their lists of offers and requests. Yeah, people have not even talked about the rules of origin. So you've not agreed on the basic tenets that form a free trade agreement. Yeah, but then you're rushing to say, let's implement it because these are the timelines that have been given by the African Union. So I think I would not rush to pass judgment on Ethiopia because their leaders have sat down and decided, you know what? Before we get into an agreement, let us see everything that it entails before we put our signature to it.
So, gentlemen, what should happen now? Here we are. 24 countries have signed. 30 countries are yet to sign. They are expected to sign. Are we likely to see this dream becoming a reality?
Well, the dream should become a reality at some point. But what needs to come, we need to put things in order according to how they're supposed to proceed. So I think my thinking would be, we need to sit down and look at the other key protocols that have yet to be agreed upon. Sit down and thrash an understanding of how that is going to be. Agree on how you're going to protect the small and micro enterprises across the divide. Agree how we are going to treat the foreigners who come into this market to take advantage of an expanded market. After we've agreed on most of these things, then we can be able to say, okay, gentlemen, we are brothers and sisters of the African continent. Let's sit together and agree on how we are now going to proceed from this point.
Kisa, do you think African leaders are pushing this agenda for foreign powers?
For foreign powers, I may not say so, because the CFTA is one of the offshoots of achieving the Pan-African integration. Like
there is a feeling that the key beneficiary of a free trade area in Africa is likely to be China. Do you share in those sentiments?
Well, Africa, technically speaking, Africa is already in China's pockets. I mean, if you look at...
So is it in the interest of China that we integrate?
No, it is much more in the... It may be, I don't know, but I mean, I may not say so, but it is more in the interest of Africa to integrate. Because Africa is more fragmented than before, and Africa needs to speak one voice when it comes to international forums and all that. But most importantly, to go back to the question that you had earlier asked from Edgar, yes, the dream of having a united Africa is important. Yes, it is important. But the question is the how. when you get the basics wrong, like we have got currently, then you are doomed for. And the challenge with liberalizing is that once you give offers,
You can't take.
you can't go back. You can't say, unajua nini, let me start. I was thinking, let me. No, you cannot. So that's the challenge, that you might end up giving more than you would have given, and you end up constraining even your domestic capacities to be able to industrialize, to be able to build your competitiveness, because that is what China did. China, first of all, disengaged from the whole globalization and liberation trend, built its capacities, built its domestic industry, and today, China it has opened up. China can afford to have our presidents go and line up Musuru Moja to pay homage to Xi Jinping. This is the challenge. So we do need to organize, first of all. We need to, first of all, backtrack our steps. Let us not rush. Sometimes fools do rushing sometimes. So let us backtrack, consult with the people, because they are actually even the beneficiaries. So you are negotiating for the people. Let us involve the people. Let us have the stakeholders, the private sector, MSMEs, women, especially informal cross-border traders. Let them be involved. And then after all that, we are able to also be ensured that we can have the safety agreed upon. But it's a good initiative.
It's a noble initiative.
Yes.
There is no disagreement over this. But tell me this, I mean, you have a situation whereby South Sudanese cannot agree among themselves. The same case with Somalia.
Yes.
Yes.
So how are we expected to agree with each other on a bigger platform?
One of the fundamental goals that we set out to achieve in East Africa, even at the time when South Sudan was being admitted in, was to talk about the social pillar of integration. We have focused, what we are implementing is what we call, we have a market-led liberalization process in East Africa. It's market-led. But we've forgotten about the social integration pillar. And that is very important, because you need to talk about how you're going to talk about integration at the social level. These suspicions come from national level. So even South Sudan, talk about Kenya, talk about Burundi, all these countries have internal strife. So then, at what point are you going to talk about integrating on a social level at the regional level, let's say between Kenya and Tanzania, when you still have your internal problems that have not been sorted out? So that is the question we need to start asking ourselves. Before we admit, for example, a country like South Sudan, was proper consultation made in terms of how to help them develop their processes internally before putting them on a pedestal to now start opening up at regional level, for example? That is what Europe, if you look at the European integration process, there was a minimum requirement of countries that were trying to join the European Union to achieve before they are now allowed to integrate as part of the European Union. Why have we not followed the same model, for example? Because it works. Yeah.
So I mean this, Kisa, are Africans in charge of Africa?
Africa has never been in charge of Africa.
So who is in charge?
We need to look at the superstructure. We have the empire. And the empire is Europe. The empire is the USA. The empire is the World Bank. The Bank of Uganda, for example, cannot make any decision which the World Bank disputes. Our national budgets are first scrutinized by the IMF and World Bank before being passed. So
this is Uganda.
It is the same everywhere in Africa. No, it is the same everywhere. I want to leave Jomo Kenyatta tomorrow, so I will not use the Kenyan example. But this is the reality, by the way. So Africa has never been independent. Whether policy-wise, we still depend on the policies that have been prescribed by the Bretton Woods institutions. Perhaps it may be the flag independence, but I have also seen in some countries. I've been in West Africa for 2 years. I lived there for 2 years. But you could find that actually in some institutions you would find a French flag and no let's say Cameroonian flag. So I mean, we still pour homage. We are still really looking to the other side rather than to ourselves. So that's the challenge.
So the question then comes: if Africans are not in charge of Africa, then how are we expected to chart the business front for Africa?
No, but we have had instances where we have had African leaders say, take a stand, and that stand had stood. We can take an example of Zimbabwe, even though it had serious repercussions, but we have had really some instances where we have had African leaders take that stand. But the issue is indeed when we keep on bringing. I was watching the Brits, and they were telling us reduce your borrowing appetite. You know, you go into PPPs. Now the model, when you start borrowing, PPPs is a narrative that is being promoted by the World Bank, and because I mean this is another way of channeling, of just ensuring bigger outflows of resources. So the issue is we need to look into what works best for Africa, the modalities, and yes, it can have we can do it. The CFTA really would be an ideal agreement if we first of all backtracked. The African Agenda 2063, for example, under the mining vision of Africa, how do we beneficiate our resources, our minerals? But let us look at the continuous trading in the ivory, in gold and processed, in coffee and processed. You know, as long as we continue to be producers and exporters of raw value-added exports.
Tell me this, Edgar.
Yes.
The first international powers to show interest in being enjoined in CFTA was China, and India came in second.
Yes.
What are they saying that we are not?
Well, you see, there's the whole element about, if you look at the global trade paradigm, there's the question of how to foster cooperation between South countries. So China and India are considered to be southern countries. So they're looking at this as a potential market to be able to talk about in terms of how to open it up and trade between themselves. But the question one should ask themselves is, how much trade is being conducted between China and Africa, for example? And in whose favor is that trade?
Of course, we know it's China.
You get. Then from that point, then you start questioning and saying, okay, if we are supposed to cooperate, how is the cooperation, what are the modalities of cooperation between Africa and China, for example? And how are we going to try and address this issue? For example, you have a lot of products being dumped in the trade sense of the word, in the sense that they're cheap products that are edging out the local market. For example, I'll give you an example. Uganda has been the biggest market for Kenyan products. All of a sudden, Chinese products have now edged out Kenyan products from the Ugandan market.
Yep.
So how do we talk about that trade displacement of African countries from their own market before we talk about cooperating with other regions, for example? Yeah.
That's a very interesting perspective there, that China is running everybody out of business.
Like this.
And the same case he applies actually, even here in Kenya.
Yeah.
Whereby when you look at intra-EAC trade, I mean, it has been decreasing at a very fast rate.
Yes.
And on the other hand, we want to increase intra-Africa trade. Are we talking about mirages here?
Well, it's a question of not getting our basics right. Because when we talked about integration, we had gotten to a point where we were proceeding well. But then at a point, you have differences between leaders, you have differences between traders. Then you start seeing traders in Tanzania being blocked by Tanzanian authorities, traders in Uganda facing difficulties getting their products into Rwanda. But you're talking about having a common market. At what point are we going to realize and say, look, let's agree that we need to do business with one another? Because even if you deny Kenyan products entering into the other market, but you're opening up to Chinese and South African products, that's a lose-lose situation still.
Kisa, I want you to have the closing remarks here. Tell us this. Then, should we throw our hands and say it's a hopeless case for Africa?
No, it is not a hopeless case. Our president, especially His Excellency Kenyatta, has been one of the biggest, champions of the of Pan-Africanism, of increased intra-African trade, CFTA. We need to give them credit where it is due. Yes, they have dreamed, and it's a very good dream of having a united Africa on all fronts, infrastructure-wise, trade-wise, and all that. But now the question is, it is up to us now. We need to help them on how do we realize that dream. So our political leaders, led by their wisdom, have wished we need to have intra-African trade under the CFTA. Let us, with the technocrats, now advise you on the how. How do we do it, rather than increasing, because there are chances that you might have actually an even more disintegrated Africa, especially when trade does not work. Because trade, what controls us? It is money. Money matters. I mean, economics control us, our lives. So when you find that the very epitome of our existence, which is economics, is not being got right.
Very good.
Then that becomes too much integration, and then you start having now Africa. You're having a lot of trade challenges. You're having politically driven, challenges out of trade issues. So the issue is that now we need to now take some time to breathe, even dream. That is important, and then see where do we want to go. How was the first of all the initiative of having a One Africa brought up? What were the defining factors? And then we'll be able to have a very amazing safety. But importantly, we should not be crossed in. We should start looking at how do we be receptive to other countries.
Gentlemen,
Yes.
allow me to whisper this. This program is watched by African leaders, and they are listening and watching you.
Hopefully, we have.
It's not even a question of hope. We believe that they are listening,
Yes.
and they're going to take the necessary steps.
Okay.
Because the desire of all of us is to become one continent.
Yes. Absolutely.
It's to become one country
Very important.
as a continent.
Yes, very
Yes.
important.
Yeah.
Kisa, thank you so very much. How did you end up being called Kisa Africa?
And I am a Munyankore, and Kisa is
Oh,
an
it's
automatic.
Kisa.
Yes, either Kisa is the same. Yeah, it's a name that that is given to male children for twins.
How did you end up being called Africa?
Africa, I was born in 1990, December, and in Feb 1990, Mandela had been released, the late Madiba, and my dad happened to be in South Africa. He was a trade unionist, and so when I was born, he called me South Africa, and my mom would not allow that. So the compromise was removed south, and I
think
named
in
Africa.
my second life, I'll also be called Kimani Africa. Edgar, thank you so very
Thank
much,
you.
and Kisa,
Thank you
many
so
thanks
much.
indeed for joining us here. We
Yeah.
look forward for more of these engagements right here.
Yeah.
I appreciate
on KBC Channel 1.
Yeah.
Otherwise, enjoy your evening.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Very good. We have been discussing how to integrate Africa and increase trade, and of course, movement of people on the continent of Africa. And you have heard it from the men themselves. Let's move on now, where difficulties in securing land for major infrastructure projects such as roads, railway, pipeline, and airports. So the government draft the compulsory land acquisition law that compels landowners to surrender land for national projects and be compensated for it. On the next edition